Okay, we're going to pick up in this video. We've just finished our smoke testing, and we're going to walk through and do a bit of a code walkthrough of um, the AI Studio configuration. So let me get rid of my terminal here. And we'll start with kind of Bootstrap. So this is pretty standard bootstrapper for the sandbox. You could see, the first thing that we're doing here is going out and grabbing some of the configuration data from the other two state files for VNet shared and for VNet app. So that, these are all the dependencies to the sandbox that this configuration has. And once we have that, we're going to grab some input from the user. This is the user that's going to get the role assignments to talk to Azure Storage and Azure Files. So by default, we get that from the currently logged in user, but you can change it. And then we do some validations. We check to make sure that the environment variable for the secret was set. We check to see if the owner object ID was provided. And then here's where we actually do the role assignment. So there's two role assignments: storage blob data contributor and storage file data privileged contributor. So one for blob storage, one for Azure Files. Here's where we upload the documents. So, we have to temporarily disable the firewall so we can upload the documents. So we do that first. We sleep for a little bit to let those settings propagate. And then we go into a loop and keep retrying the upload until it works. And then finally, we disable the public access. So we turn the firewall back on to secure the environment. And we write out our terraform.tfvars file that Terraform's going to need to apply the configuration, and we've already seen that here. So the other files here in the configuration are the common TF file, which is where I define all of the Terraform providers that we're going to use. Of course, we use the Azure RM provider. We use the Azure API provider, and we use the random provider for that. And in both cases, we use the service principal to authenticate. And remember, that service principal only has contributor access by default. That was set up in previous configurations. All right, so that's the common file. Here's the meat of the configuration. So this is adapted from a ton of different documentation sources. So had a lot of help on this from a variety of folks. And so I just want to express my gratitude to those people that helped me pull this together. First thing we do is set up a couple local variables just for ease of use for both our resource group ID and our storage account ID. We generate a random name that we're going to use for our various resources so that we don't conflict with other deployments. And then here's the code that we use to provision AI services. So there is no Azure RM resource for this, so we had to use the Azure API to provision this. You'll also notice that the API that we're hitting here is in preview, so this will very likely change maybe multiple times before it GAs. So we'll try to keep this configuration tested and updated as those APIs change. But basically we're tying this AI services resource to the sandbox resource group in the same location where the sandbox is defined. We're giving it a system assigned managed identity. That's very important. As you start working with resources inside the hub, they start needing to talk to each other, and AI Studio is very smart about using system assigned managed identities to do that. And then here's the meat of the AI services, where we basically, name it. We provide the type of resource that we want to provision, which is AI services. This is a new type of resource that was developed specifically for use with AI Studio. We disable public network access. So this is again part of the network isolation that we're doing, and we set the skew to a kind of the smallest, lowest end skew that we can use. I believe it's an S0. Let's go look at that skew setting yes, it's S0 skew. So it's the lowest end AI services skew, which should help from a cost perspective. So that's the AI services resource. We then set up a private endpoint. Oops, sorry. We set up a private endpoint for our services resource here. And we set up a private DNS zone group to create the IP addresses associated with that. There are multiple private IP addresses that get provisioned. That's probably worth taking a look real quick. So if we go back to the Azure portal and look at those private endpoints, whoops, I didn't want to go in there. I wanted to go over here. All right, if we go look at our private endpoints, let's look at the one, for example, for AI services, which is this one. Okay, so that has a private IP address associated with it, but if we drill in on it and we look at the DNS configuration and the private DNS zone groups, you will see that there are multiple endpoints involved here. One for cognitive services, one for OpenAI. So there's multiple groups involved here, private DNS zone groups, and multiple private IP addresses that get involved here. So that's important to understand how those private DNS zone groups work. It is also worth mentioning that the private DNS zones themselves were actually added to a different configuration. So the way the sandbox works, all the private DNS zones are set up here in VNet app. And I have some nice Terraform code here where I can just basically declare a private variable with a list of all the private DNS zones that I want to set up, which you can see here, right? And there's multiple new ones here that were added to support this configuration. Those two were added. The first one is for cognitive search or AI search now. The Azure Container Registry private DNS zone was added. Here's for cognitive services. And this is new for AI Studio. This is for OpenAI. And this is for Azure AI Search. So there were several new private DNS zones added to the VNet app configuration, and those are automatically linked to the right VNets and ready to roll by the time we go and deploy the AI Studio configuration. So that's why these statements work, because those private DNS zones were created in advance and then passed down to this configuration by looking at the state file from VNet app. Okay, so that is the AI search resource. Next, we're going to do, AI services. Next, we're going to do AI search. So this is AI search or cognitive search, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. There's a simple skew choice there as well, which you can tweak for cost optimization. So if we go look at the AI search skew, we've got it set to basic. The cheaper one is free. We do have a few things that we want to showcase as part of the use cases in AI Studio, so basic was a better fit. but you can tweak that yourself if you like. We create a private endpoint here for Azure AI Search. And again, this helps, promote network isolation and network segmentation. And we're, as well as we are also disabling public network access on Azure AI Search. So we're taking those security principles and applying them, across all of these different resources. Here's our App Insights workspace. Here's our Azure Container Registry. We did have to provision a premium SKU, I believe, for Azure Container Registry because that is a requirement for AI Studio. AI Studio won't work with basic or standard, so that's the reason why we used premium there. And we've set up our private endpoint for the container registry. And then finally, we can go provision our hub. So this is also done through AZ API as opposed to the Terraform Azure RM provider. You can also see here that there is a preview API that we're using. So this will probably change as we approach GA. And then here's the meat of this configuration, which is all the properties that get passed down to the API to provision the hub. Okay. Here's where we link up the App Insights workspace. Here's where we link up the container registry. This is where you set it up for data isolation or for network isolation. Here's where we link up the key vault. There's multiple settings for hubs that you can use. You can allow in network isolation, you can allow internet outbound traffic without restriction, or you can restrict the internet outbound traffic to specific endpoints. Since we're going to be experimenting with a variety of different services and capabilities, it made more sense to allow internet outbound, but for a production deployment, you may decide to lock that down. Here's where we're disabling public network access to the hub. Here's where we link in the storage account from the sandbox. And here's where we choose identity-based authentication for when the hub needs to connect up to data stores and resources. So we then are in our last bit here where we deploy the hub. And we elected, the private endpoint for the hub. And we elected to not deploy the AI Studio project and using infrastructure as code, but to do that interactively. So, but here's the code to do it if you did want to include that. And that is pretty much it for the walkthrough of the new AI Studio configuration. We hope you enjoy it and that you are able to use it to test out all the cool new AI functionality in Azure and test out all your AI use cases. Thanks a lot, everybody. See you in the next video. Bye.